the man once hailed as the king of comedy. Many say that without Jerry, modern comedy wouldn't exist. He walked so that today's comedians could run. But behind the laughter, Jerry's life was far from simple, and certainly not as spotless as fans might have believed. Born on March 16, 1926, Jerry Lewis entered the world as Joseph Levitch, the son of two Jewish immigrants. His father, Danny Levitch, had come from the Russian Empire to New York, and his mother, Rachel, from Warsaw. Both were performers, his father a vaudeville entertainer, his mother a pianist, and it didn't take long for young Jerry to catch the same spark. From an early age, he developed a mischievous, impulsive sense of humor. As a teenager, he was known for his pranks and playful troublemaking. His early stage act, known as the record act, was simple yet clever. He would mime along to a song while a record played off stage. But when he tried it in Buffalo at just 15 years old, the performance flopped. The audience didn't laugh, and Jerry found himself without work. After that failure, he nearly gave up on show business altogether. He took whatever jobs he could find, selling sodas, ushering in theaters across New York, just to make ends meet. But destiny had other ideas. Through one of his father's old vaudeville friends, Jerry found his way back to the stage. And that's when everything began to change. The friend's name was Max Coleman, and he was the one who urged Jerry to give performing another try. Taking his advice, Lewis returned to the stage, working the Borscht Belt, a stretch of lively resorts in New York's Catskill Mountains that drew crowds of Jewish vacationers hungry for laughter and song. It was there that Irving Kay, a talent agent, happened to see Jerry's act and soon became his manager. For many young men in the 1940s, life was suddenly interrupted by war. But Jerry Lewis was not among them. A heart murmur kept him from serving, leaving him free to follow a different path, one that would change his life. During this time, he met Patty Palmer, a young singer with charm and grace. Their connection was instant. On October 3, 1944, they married, and over the next decade, built a family together. First adopting a son in 1949, then welcoming 5 biological children throughout the 1950s. From the outside, it seemed like a dream. 2 entertainers in love, a rising star, a growing family. But as Jerry's fame soared, the cracks in that perfect picture began to show. 1 year after their wedding, the 19-year-old Lewis was performing at the Glass Hat Club in New York City. Sharing the same stage was a 27-year-old singer still searching for his big break, Dean Martin. It would take 2 more years before fate brought them together again. This time, they met at the 500 Club in Atlantic City, where Jerry was performing solo. When the scheduled singer suddenly canceled, the club was left in a bind. Jerry had an idea. He suggested Dean step in. Their first show together didn't go as planned. In fact, it bombed so badly that Skinny D'Amato, the owner of the club, threatened to fire them if they didn't find a way to improve. The 2 young performers realized they had to reinvent themselves, fast. And somehow, through that pressure, through trial and instinct, Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin discovered something extraordinary between them. What began as a desperate improvisation soon became pure magic, the kind of chemistry that couldn't be taught, rehearsed, or faked. Together, they would redefine comedy for a generation. What truly set Martin and Lewis apart was their ability to ad-lib, the unscripted humor that made audiences erupt with laughter. At the 500 Club, they ditched pre-written material and let spontaneity guide their act, with Lewis constantly interrupting Martin in ways that were completely unexpected. The crowd loved it. Once they discovered this formula, they became an unstoppable force. They soon began touring up and down the eastern seaboard, culminating at New York's famed Copacabana Club. In 1948, NBC recognized their appeal and booked them for the Martin and Lewis Show, a radio program that would run until 1953. Around the same time, Ed Sullivan was launching one of his first variety shows, Toast of the Town. Martin and Lewis appeared in the premiere episode and continued to make frequent appearances on television variety shows. By April 1949, they decided to test their own TV show. Expectations were high, but the reaction was underwhelming. The television audience didn't respond to their antics in the same way stage and radio crowds had. Despite this lukewarm reception, It was Hollywood that would truly catapult them to fame. Paramount signed the duo in 1949, and their first film together was My Friend Irma, starring Marie Wilson and Diana Lynn as two bumbling roommates searching for love. Though initially hired simply for comic relief, Martin and Lewis stole the spotlight, showing the world how their chemistry could light up the big screen. Between 1950 and 1956, they made 14 films together, each building on their growing popularity. Yet even as Lewis and Martin soared, competition lurked nearby. In 1950, a young actor named Sammy Petrillo, 8 years Jerry's junior, bore a striking resemblance to Lewis. Seeing potential rivalry, Lewis grew wary and decided to intervene. He hired Petrillo to play a baby in a sketch for the Colgate Comedy Hour. Petrillo remembered Lewis as abrasive during their first meeting. Initially hesitant, he was persuaded to sign with Lewis's agency, MCA, but the arrangement quickly backfired. Promises of work never materialized, leaving Petrillo frustrated. Rather than helping, Lewis's plan ended up hurting the young actor, showing a side of the comedian that few saw behind the laughter. Jerry Lewis had kept Petrillo on the sidelines intentionally, making sure the young performer never got a chance to work and never threatened his own career. Because Petrillo was still a minor, his father stepped in and freed him from the contract. In the early 1950s, Petrillo teamed up with singer Duke Mitchell, forming a double act modeled after Martin and Lewis. Lewis was far from pleased. Using his influence, he made sure to block their opportunities whenever he could. Meanwhile, tensions between Lewis and Martin were quietly building. By the spring of 1956, as their fame skyrocketed, the spotlight increasingly favored Lewis, leaving Martin feeling overshadowed. Fans and critics alike called Lewis the real talent, suggesting that Martin was simply along for the ride. The strain reached a breaking point in 1954, when Look magazine featured Lewis on the cover. A photo had been taken of both men, but Martin was cropped out entirely. It was a small gesture, but one that symbolized the growing rift, the beginning of the end for the legendary duo. Their final film together, Hollywood or Bust, was far from enjoyable. Afterward, they completed a short series of prearranged engagements at the Copacabana Club, their farewell shows. Exactly 10 years after their first pairing, Martin and Lewis performed their last act together. For a decade, they had built their careers side by side, each relying on the other. Now, Lewis was alone, and the split shook his confidence deeply. Shortly after, while on vacation in Las Vegas with his wife, Lewis received an urgent call. Judy Garland, stricken with strep throat, couldn't perform, and her manager, who was also her husband, wanted Lewis to step in. Hesitant at first, stepping onto the stage solo was intimidating. But the crowd's response was overwhelming, and the thunderous applause reignited his self-assurance. Buoyed by the Vegas audience, Lewis recorded the songs he had performed, earning a record deal and launching a new chapter. Soon, he was performing at the Sands Hotel and Casino, proving he could captivate a crowd on his own. The stage that once shared his laughter with Martin now belonged entirely to Jerry Lewis, and he was ready to make it his own. From that point on, Jerry Lewis proved he could carry an audience entirely on his own. He became a true solo performer, appearing on specials and even hosting the Academy Awards 3 times between 1956 and 1959. At the same time, he remained with Paramount, beginning a new phase of his career starring in films without Dean Martin by his side. In 1959, Lewis signed a contract that gave him unprecedented control over his future projects and made him the highest-paid performer in Hollywood at the time. The following year, Paramount made a decision that would inadvertently change filmmaking forever. They had planned to release Cinderfella during the summer but opted to save it for Christmas instead, leaving a gap in their schedule. Jerry Lewis seized the opportunity and created The Bellboy. Not only did he star in it, but he also directed, co-wrote, and produced the film. The schedule was grueling, days spent filming, nights performing live, yet Lewis pressed on. To save time, the film leaned heavily on physical comedy instead of dialogue, and he used monitors on set to instantly review his scenes rather than wait for daily footage. Paramount, uncomfortable with this unconventional approach, withdrew their backing. Undeterred, Lewis finished the film using his own money. In the end, he had the last laugh. The the bellboy became a major success, both critically and financially. From then on, Lewis maintained significant creative control over his work, often taking on writing, directing, producing, or all three roles in his films. Even as a solo star, the shadow of his early partnership with Dean Martin lingered. The consequences of their split weighed heavily on him. Lewis later admitted he and Martin hadn't spoken privately for 20 years, a regret he carried throughout his life. Publicly, however, they reunited on occasion, the most famous moment coming in 1976 when Frank Sinatra orchestrated a surprise for Lewis on one of his annual Labor Day telethons for the Muscular Dystrophy Association, bringing Martin back to his side for a heartfelt reunion. While Jerry Lewis managed to mend his bond with Dean Martin before it was too late, his relationship with his family told a very different story. Despite never hiding his infidelities, Lewis remained married to Patty Palmer for nearly 4 decades. But by 1980, Patty had reached her limit and filed for divorce. Around the same time, Lewis met Sandra Pitnick, a flight attendant trained as a ballerina, who earned a small dancing role in his film Hardly Working. The two married in February 1983, eventually adopting a daughter in the early 90s. From that point on, Lewis seemed to leave his first family entirely behind, even as the years made it clear his time was finite. Health troubles had long shadowed his life. Lewis suffered his first heart attack in 1960 at just 34, followed by 2 more in 1982 and 2006. When he finally passed away in 2017, reaching 91 years old, it was as much a testament to his resilience as it was a moment that invited scrutiny of his personal life. Patty Palmer, his wife for nearly 40 years, and he had raised 6 children together. Yet, in a move that shocked many, Lewis cut all 6 sons and their families out of his will, leaving everything solely to Pitnick and their daughter. After his death, several of his children spoke out about life with their father. His youngest, Anthony, described Jerry as unpredictable, never knowing which version of him would come home, and called him emotionally abusive, though he admitted he still carried some warmth for his father. His older brother, Gary, offered a far harsher assessment, labeling Lewis mean and cruel, claiming he never showed his children any love. The controversies didn't end with family grievances. In 2022, Vanity Fair reported that multiple female co-stars from his 1960s films accused Lewis of harassment, verbal abuse, and even sexual assault, adding a darker chapter to the legacy of the man whose laughter had once captivated millions. To this day, the allegations against Jerry Lewis have not led to any legal action. Yet, despite the controversies surrounding his personal life, there's no denying the profound impact he had on the world of comedy. Before Lewis, humor on screen was far more rigid. He dared to be bold, to take risks, and above all, to laugh at himself. Jerry Lewis's life was a study in contrasts, a portrait of brilliance intertwined with turbulence, laughter shadowed by heartbreak, public admiration shadowed by private conflict. From his earliest days performing in the Borscht Belt resorts to his meteoric rise alongside Dean Martin, Lewis's story is one of relentless ambition, tireless creativity, and a stubborn refusal to settle for mediocrity. Every setback, from a failed skit in Buffalo at the tender age of 15 to the early stumbles alongside Martin at the 500 Club, only seemed to sharpen his determination. The laughter he inspired was not merely entertainment. It was a shield, a tool to navigate the rigors of life and the pressures of a world that often demanded perfection from its stars. The partnership with Dean Martin was revolutionary. They were not simply a comedic duo, they were an institution. Their chemistry, both on stage and off, set the standard for what a comedy team could achieve. The improvisational brilliance that emerged from their performances redefined comedy in the 1940s and 1950s. Lewis's interruptions, Martin's smooth responses, the spontaneous jokes, and unexpected physical comedy all coalesced into a performance style that felt fresh, chaotic, and thrillingly unpredictable. Audiences were captivated, critics intrigued, and the duo's influence on future generations of comedians was profound. Yet beneath the glittering success, tensions simmered. As Lewis's star began to rise more prominently, the spotlight often shifted away from Martin, leaving him in the shadows. While fans celebrated Lewis as the talented one, Martin's contributions were downplayed, creating a rift that grew with each passing year. The subtle slights, such as the infamous Look magazine cover in 1954 that cropped Martin out entirely, were more than mere oversights. They were symbols of the widening chasm between the two men. By 1956, the partnership, once the gold standard of comedy, reached its breaking point. Their final film together, Hollywood or Bust, was marked by tension and fatigue, signaling the end of an era. After a series of farewell performances at the Copacabana, a decade-long chapter closed, and Lewis was left to navigate the world alone. The split shook him deeply. Confidence he had relied on in the partnership wavered, and the familiar safety net of a collaborator was gone. It was during this period that Lewis discovered his capacity to thrive solo. A fateful call in Las Vegas, when Judy Garland was unable to perform due to illness, offered him an unexpected opportunity. Stepping onto the stage alone for the first time in such a public setting was daunting, but the crowd's overwhelming response reignited a spark of confidence. That performance became a pivotal moment, cementing his belief that he could succeed without Martin. From that point on, Lewis's career blossomed in new directions, with live performances at the Sand Hotel and Casino, recording contracts, and continued appearances on television and in films. The era of Jerry Lewis as a solo entertainer had begun, and the world was witnessing a new kind of comedic artistry. Lewis's ambition extended beyond performance. He sought control over his work, signing contracts that allowed him unprecedented creative freedom. Films like The Bellboy exemplify his innovative spirit. He directed, co-wrote, produced, and starred in the movie, embracing a physically driven style of comedy that minimized dialogue and relied on visual storytelling. The approach was not universally accepted. Paramount initially withdrew support, and Lewis had to finance the project himself. Yet his gamble paid off. The Bellboy became both a critical and commercial success, affirming his vision and cementing his status as a trailblazer in the industry. From then on, creative control became a hallmark of his career, with Lewis shaping his films through writing, directing, producing, or all three roles, pushing the boundaries of what a performer could achieve. Even as he achieved professional triumphs, his personal life remained complex and often painful. His marriage to Patty Palmer, which endured for nearly 40 years, eventually ended in divorce amid infidelities and personal conflicts. Lewis found love again with Sandra Pitnick, a professionally trained ballerina who had earned a small dancing role in Hardly Working. Their union brought him stability and a daughter, yet the separation from his first family left enduring scars. His decision to cut his 6 sons from Patty Palmer out of his will after his death, leaving his estate solely to Pitnick and their daughter, was viewed by many as a final painful act of estrangement. Lewis's relationship with his children was fraught. His youngest, Anthony, described the uncertainty of growing up with a father whose moods were unpredictable, sometimes emotionally distant, yet still capable of moments of warmth. His older brother, Gary, offered harsher recollections, characterizing Lewis as cruel and unloving. The shadows of these relationships lingered, adding complexity to the narrative of a man celebrated for bringing joy to millions while grappling with profound personal challenges behind the scenes. Controversy continued to follow him beyond family dynamics. In 2022, Vanity Fair reported that several female co-stars from his 1960s films accused him of harassment, verbal abuse, and even sexual assault. While these allegations did not result in legal action, they remain part of the broader conversation about his legacy, reminding us that greatness and flaw often coexist in ways that are uncomfortable and difficult to reconcile. And yet, despite these personal failings and controversies, the transformative impact of Jerry Lewis on comedy cannot be overstated. Before his emergence, comedic performance on screen adhered to rigid conventions. Lewis shattered those boundaries with fearlessness, audacity, and a willingness to be vulnerable and absurd in front of the camera. He dared to be chaotic, unpredictable, and deeply human, opening the door for generations of comedians to experiment, push limits, and embrace the risks inherent in their craft. Steve Martin, Richard Pryor, Jim Carrey, and countless others owe their creative freedom, in part, to the foundation Lewis laid. His approach demonstrated that comedy could be anarchic, emotionally resonant, and visually inventive, and that the performer himself could be both the subject and the instrument of humor. Even late in life, Lewis remained a figure of fascination. Public reunions with Dean Martin, orchestrated by Frank Sinatra for charitable events, reminded audiences of the enduring magic the duo once created, while also hinting at the fragility of human connection and the weight of unresolved tensions. He was a man who could inspire joy with one hand and provoke pain with the other, whose career was a blueprint for creative courage and whose personal life serves as a sobering testament to the complexity of genius. Reflecting on Jerry Lewis's story, one is struck by the dualities that defined him: brilliance and imperfection, public adulation and private isolation, relentless ambition and human vulnerability. His laughter was infectious, his creativity boundless, and his influence eternal, yet it existed alongside estrangement, controversy, and the consequences of choices made in pursuit of his art. In this, he remains profoundly human, a man whose life cannot be simplified into easy categories of hero or villain, but must be appreciated in its full, intricate complexity. In the final analysis, Jerry Lewis's legacy is multifaceted. He revolutionized comedy, leaving behind a body of work that continues to inspire performers and entertain audiences. He reshaped the possibilities of cinema, demonstrating that a performer could be an auteur, wielding creative authority over every aspect of production. He challenged social and artistic conventions, proving that laughter could be both a weapon and a bomb, that vulnerability and absurdity could coexist in harmony. And though his personal life was riddled with failures, estrangements, and controversy, it is inseparable from the story of his artistic achievements, a reminder that the lives of extraordinary artists are rarely simple, neat, or free from contradiction. Ultimately, Jerry Lewis lived a life that few could imagine, let alone achieve. He transformed an entire art form, shaped the careers of those who followed, and left an indelible mark on the world of entertainment. His influence endures not only in the comedians who continue to cite him as an inspiration, but also in the audiences who still marvel at his audacity, inventiveness, and sheer willingness to embrace the absurd. He was a man of contrasts, of laughter and complexity, of triumph and regret. He was, in every sense, unforgettable. And perhaps that is the truest legacy of all, a life lived boldly, creatively, and unapologetically, a life that continues to resonate, challenge, and inspire long after the final curtain has fallen. Countless comedians we admire today, from Steve Martin to Richard Pryor to Jim Carrey, trace part of their inspiration back to Lewis. When Jim Carrey heard of his passing, he said that Jerry's comedy stretched reality so far that it felt like pure anarchy. He set the stage for a new way of performing, where the absurd and the daring could coexist. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Jerry Lewis's life and legacy, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more remarkable stories. For exclusive perks, including a voice in who we cover next, consider joining our membership through the link in the description. Your support keeps these stories alive. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.